Hi there, my name is Philip Eidson. I want to welcome you to the Art of Procurement podcast, the podcast that helps you, a forward-thinking procurement professional, position yourself and your team to proactively take advantage of the revolution that's taking place in procurement today. By interviewing industry trailblazers and sharing insights from our own experiences, my team and I pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that procurement teams are using to elevate their impact. And today on the show, I'm joined by Paul Bagley, the Director of Commercial Contracting at Acosta Group. Now, Paul is a trained and licensed attorney. He's also a seasoned procurement professional, so I thought he had a great blend of experience to shine a light on a topic that can be a challenge for all procurement teams. How can we be more effective in our collaboration with our colleagues in legal? So we dig deep into this topic during our conversation. So if you've ever wondered what you can do to accelerate the contract review process, different approaches to take when working with outside counsel versus internal legal, or are you looking to create greater alignment between both functions, then this is definitely the episode for you. We start, as always, with me asking Paul if he found procurement or if procurement found him.
So procurement definitely found me, as I'm sure a lot of people that get asked that question, that's probably the way they answer it. I was in a legal department that continuously did more and more business terms and conditions and pricing discussions because we saw gaps. There was no procurement department in where I'm referencing. And so the procurement department was actually born out of a bunch of people in the legal department working with the business directly, and the company.
They try to buy stuff and they need your help.
Yeah, they just, you're like, okay, so y'all are the contracts people. Yeah. So we see gaps in contracting and where we could help, and then it became, how about we push the other party on these things, and then it rolled into just a full-blown procurement department, which is how procurement found me. And then I was a category manager soon thereafter. And most of the procurement groups I've been in have actually had people with legal backgrounds at the lead negotiator level.
Interesting, because that's is not necessarily the norm. Most of us in procurement, as I'm sure you've kind of seen as you've been on your journey, we pick up enough from speaking with our legal colleagues that we can be dangerous, and we can negotiate around certain things, and we know what to look for. But we don't have certainly I didn't have a trained legal background. You just kind of do it from experience. You kind of get an eye for what to look out for and what not for.
I think that's probably the norm, and what a lot of people would say is the best path. I don't think there's I have a bias on being an attorney. I think it's whatever path where procurement finds you. I think that's a fine path, but I've definitely worked side by side with people that are not trained as an attorney, but have picked up so much that you would never know. So I turn that around on the procurement people. Just because you did not go to law school is not a crutch for not reading your contracts and not going through and advising the business on terms and conditions that affect their purchasing. And which is really what I've been pleasantly surprised in my career in seeing, is that there are a lot of non-attorneys out there that are very capable and very good at contract drafting, contract issue spotting, and being able to be true deal negotiators across both pricing, risk, whatever it may be. You can't really do a full contract negotiation without balancing your timing, your price, and your risk. Those are always my three levers.
Now, did you find that having the legal background that you do have helped you when you came into a procurement role?
Oh, for sure. It really made it where I had risk and speed were the two levers that I came in with, and then pricing became the lever that I learned. versus where most procurement people are, they have the price and the speed and they learn the risk. I think that really helped me because I think procurement does itself a disservice by being the grim reaper of vendors.
Yeah.
Like the mindset that we have to strip out all the margin of the vendor. And what winds up happening, and as you well know, is that you get vendors that are not really willing to go the extra mile because they're not being paid a lot. And sometimes even I've seen this where they will miss their SLAs because they're not making any money on hitting them.
There's no incentive anymore for them, particularly.
Right. The incentive is to, when they're looking at 5 or 6 clients and half of them are paying market rate, 2 or 3 of them are paying above market rate, and you're the one at the bottom of the market rate, yes, they want to keep you as a client, but they're going to do so at the lowest the lowest amount of those clients.
Like the lowest cost to serve as they can get away with.
Exactly. It's the lowest cost they can do to get that contract invoice paid. That's really what, and you really don't want your strategic vendors to be like that.
Right. And now there's often procurement and legal when we want to talk a little bit about how can we help procurement and legal collaborate. And, certainly from my experience when I was on the buying side, there was often a little bit of tension between procurement and legal. I think oftentimes it comes from things like cycle times or points in contracts where the business may not have seen the risk, but from a legal perspective, you saw a different risk. And it was something that had to be negotiated around. I wonder if there's kind of any guidance and tips you can give us on how can you kind of close that gap between priorities? Or is that tension always going to exist? Is there always going to be some level of tension between procurement and legal?
So I have a completely opposite view because of the way that my career has gone.
Yeah.
I actually have not seen a lot of tension between the legal and procurement departments because of the way I've built my own procurement department and so on and so forth. But I understand that could happen for sure. I mean, like that makes sense. But it really is a disservice to each other. It's like two brothers fighting. Like it doesn't make any sense. You have the same goal, and you're both going about it in such similar ways that it doesn't make sense to me to fight. But I think what the two departments where they do miss each other is procurement is not looking at the total deal.
Yeah.
They are looking at what's in front of them and versus doing true category management. Now, there are procurement teams that do this really well. If you do true category management where you're going to your business owners, stakeholders, and saying, this is how long it's going to take to make a purchase with whatever their priorities are. Say they wanted to bring in a new vendor, say they needed to do a renewal, say they need to buy some real estate, whatever it could be, that procurement individual needs to be trained on how long a purchase takes for their company.
Yeah.
That could be 2 days, could be 2 years. Who knows? Like, it doesn't matter what that timeline is. And if the procurement individual doesn't know that, then they have not spoken with their legal counterparts. Now, there's a flip side to that. The legal team needs to talk to procurement and the business and see what's realistic for when purchases are known versus and you go from when they can know the purchase to when they need to have it executed. And so the legal team needs to actually tailor their templates, playbooks, whatever they use, their contracting strategy to support that in the business. And there's a give and take there. So I see it missed on both sides. But if you talk to each other about those things, then all that goes away. I see issues a lot with other departments besides the legal and procurement.
I mean, it's funny about what you say about expectation setting, essentially. I think that procurement folks sometimes get stuck in the middle between a budget holder who wants to move quickly and a lawyer who, has a deal that is going to take a little bit of time to work through.
Mm-hmm.
And so we end up pushing the stresses and the desire to move quickly of the budget holder. That's what creates the tension between the relationship between procurement and legal, because we don't necessarily know either how to manage that expectation setting with the business, and we just want it off our plate sometimes as well.
Oh yeah, I mean everybody wants that. But yeah, I know I'm not being anti-procurement person here, but when you're starting a negotiation, whether it's something for materials, and which is typically more simple, to the most wild machine learning software, like whatever it is, the procurement lead is the lead negotiator on these things. So you pull in everyone that is involved in that immediately. That's step one, whether it's your insurance group, whether it's your compliance group, whether it's your legal team. And so then all those people have a discussion with the business on the line or in the room, and then we can all set expectations for how this purchase is going to go together. And if the business comes to you, when the business comes to you and says we need to buy something in 2 weeks, you've already lost.
Yeah.
So that's like in the category management, I keep harping on category management because if category management is done well, then those type of issues are exceptions, not the rule.
Yeah, because you've already built, there's more planning that goes into the purchase of those products or the renewals or whatever it may be. And so it's not where the business is, because it happens to us all the time where the business comes to us and says, hey, I need to buy this, and by the way, this is the price. I just need a contract signing. And I'm sure you hear that all the time.
I do hear that all the time, and I heard it as a purely procurement individual. At that point, they're asking you not to do your job. Mm-hmm. So they have to understand that. And if you're not managing a relationship with your business owner, that's poor relationship management with that business owner. So you have to start off, it all goes back to all my category managers would have to meet with their business owners, they would have their bi-weeklies or monthly touch points, depending on how much purchasing was done with that business owner. But at the beginning of the year, you would do once they had their budgets, or even before that, if we got lucky, we would actually be a part of the budget making process so that we could tell them what we see in the market for particular items. But most of the time it's after the budget is set, unfortunately. But then they give you your budget, you have their budget and their goals, hopes, wishes, and dreams. Mm-hmm. And then you make a plan on how to contract for those in January, if you can. Usually it's February if you're a end of year company. So from February, you have every new vendor and every renewal and every incremental purchase mapped out. When they have to put in the contract, how long we expect it to take, when the contract is executed, budgeted amount. It becomes a roadmap for your whole year. And of course, exceptions happen, but that if you set those expectations up front and do that in a collaborative manner with legal in the room, with procurement in the room, with the FP&A usually, and then whoever else is needed for those deals, that's how you make it where legal and procurement aren't at each other's throats.
Yeah. What's your philosophy on the division of responsibility when it comes to certain red lines? Should procurement teams be empowered, within certain guide rails to not have to engage legal, or should legal always be in the room?
So if legal's always in the room, I think you're in a bad place.
Yeah.
So I've always made my teams, and I think this is best practice for the industry, where buyers or procurement individuals are able to negotiate almost every type of statement of work or every type of order form without a legal individual in the room, whether that be, a new professional services engagement or incremental increases in software, wherever it may be. They also should be empowered on new vendors for specific red lines and terms and conditions.
Yeah.
Some of the ones that stick out to me typically, and some people that listen to this that are in the legal field will not agree with me, but I think termination rights are within, I would empower the procurement individual to handle termination rights. Yeah. I think that's probably where I would get some pushback, but I think acceptance testing, net payment terms, ownership of outputs, that's also where I would probably get some pushback from some legal individuals. But the core things that you think of that are financial in a contract in nature, like those are the baseline. Mm-hmm. Invoicing times, acceptance testing, like I was talking about before, things that milestone credits, deliverables, like just the core of what you're trying to do. And even at the MSA level, I do believe that procurement individuals, or like the master agreement level. Yeah. I know acronyms, I hate acronyms, but I use them all the time.
Lots of them in procurement and legal.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of our world. And so anyway, like procurement, I think there are, like if you look at our MSA, what I've done, our master service agreement, what I've done is gone down each section of that master service agreement and said, and highlighted exactly where, who has what sections. Yeah. And it's not always legal. Sometimes it's insurance, sometimes it's compliance, sometimes it's actually accounting, or other departments too. And then from there, you do fallback provisions. And your legal, I will put the pressure on the legal team for this. The legal team should be working with your procurement, your head of procurement, to create fallback provisions for both business terms and legal terms that they feel comfortable for.
So there's guidelines that exist that,
exactly,
so long as you're within this kind of range of language, that you really don't need to escalate that into full, legal involvement to negotiate something, for example, or even to review.
Exactly. We typically do not, in all departments that I've had, we typically do not involve legal for most of our contracts. Yeah. Especially when they're on your paper or already approved paper, or it's with a current vendor, which is what if you're doing your job as a procurement individual, you're trying to consolidate vendors, right? And you're trying to work with the good ones and move out the bad. And that's also where you work with that's why your legal department needs to be in the category management discussion. So we're saying, okay, here's the 7 vendors we're trying to move out. And I think the biggest weapon that procurement individuals can have, and legal will help you with your business owner, is RFPs.
Yeah.
And I think a big gap, though, is not using your terms and conditions as a requirement for the purchase.
So being clear at the beginning as part of the requirement to submit that the MSA or whichever, whatever is the paper for whatever it is that you're buying is known by, it could just be PO terms and conditions, or it could be a full MSA, depending on what you're buying. But that's inherent in you respond. You're doing so in a way that either accepts those, or you're responding with a red line, so that red line, your red lines of that contract can be taken into account in the bigger picture when you're making an award.
Exactly. And that I am shocked when we're making $1 million purchases and we're going out to RFP and we're not considering what their response to our agreements will be, because you have no clue what the timeline is going to be for the purchase, and you have no clue what the risk is out in the marketplace. You've wasted your best opportunity.
And by the time it comes to contracting, a sourcing decision has already been made or indicated, so you don't really have any leverage at that point, or your leverage is severely limited in terms of what you're able to negotiate from a contractual position if you're only introducing that contract at that point in the process.
Or even worse, you go to impasse at that point, and then you have to go back to the RFP and tell somebody you've already said, hey, we're going to go work with somebody else. Oh, well, turns out we actually couldn't work with our first choice, so we'd love to work with you. And they'll pretend like no supplier is going to be upset with that knowledge, but you've already hurt the relationship unnecessarily.
There are a number of people listening to this, I'm sure, who have a different relationship with their legal teams in terms of their legal teams wanting to be involved in everything. And I've often come across in my career kind of the dynamics between procurement and legal and ownership and how involved legal may want to be versus not. For those people who are listening where legal are really wanting to be involved in as much as they possibly can be, do you have any tips or advice on how they can make that easier for themselves, in terms of how they are actually preparing information or interacting with, just to smooth over that process if legal do want to be more involved, make it as easy as possible for everyone involved?
So absolutely. A lot of it's like what we've talked about already is getting the contracting out, working with your legal and saying, okay, we have this RFP coming up. What's the contract? Or give me a guideline of what contracts are needed for various purchases so that I don't have to go to you every time. What we do is we have all of our approved contracts, and then the procurement individual goes into the file, is labeled by, and if your legal team's not doing that, ask them to do that. That's, be proactive about what do you need from me to make it easier for you, legal person. If you're going to be involved in every deal, we're going to be working together an awful lot. So I need to know how to make it easier for you. And the first thing I would say as that legal person is make sure we have those templates for you, so you can go in and do template selection and get that in front of the vendor so that we can start off on the right foot. I would also say, go to that, if you're going to be working with that legal person for every single contract, I would ask them for that playbook. I would ask them for items where they can help, where the procurement individual can go into contracts and actually flag where risky issues are arising.
Help them focus.
And help them. The thing that I get most of all that bogs me down is not understanding what we're purchasing. And by that, I don't mean always and how data is flowing. That's where the most risk for me is, regulated data and who's going to have it, how it's going to transmit, who's going to store it, where it's going to be stored, how much is going to be stored. Having all those questions answered when you go to legal to have something reviewed.
It's like the first time you say, I need you to review this, and by the way, this is all the answers to these questions. So understanding what it is that either the individual lawyer or the legal department in your organization cares about the most, from depending on what kind of company you are, what kind of industry you're in, and kind of being proactive in gathering and sharing that information to cut back on all that back and forth. Because I feel like it's the back and forth which is what really takes the most time.
Interesting. So we have cut that down everywhere I've been because legal and procurement create the intake forms for procurement together. And if you're not doing that with your legal, there's your answer.
Yeah. Have a formal intake for things to go into your legal team so that you're answering those questions before it goes in.
I wouldn't put it so much. So our legal team does have an intake form for on legal teams that I've worked with have an intake form. I think that's not where the intake form actually should live.
Okay.
It should be wherever the actual internal customer,
Mm-hmm.
because all procurement's going to do, they're going to look at the intake form and say, okay, I need to go talk to the business.
I'm the postman here.
Yeah, so it wastes a lot of procurement's time, and that's not okay for legal to do either. But a lot of times legal's doing that because they're not introduced straight to the business.
Yeah.
The procurement is their client. But that's not the way. If we have any takeaway from this discussion, I think the best way for legal and procurement to work together is to remove that barrier and have them collectively have a client internally. So if your requester comes in, they look at you and the legal team as a team, and that you're working together, and whatever procurement says is because they've already spoken to legal, and we've already had these discussions, and we're lockstep with each other. And that's really where I'm used to, and not living in that kind of world would be very frustrating to me, because I think that those two groups are, like I said in the very beginning, they're siblings. Like they should be tied at the hip. There's no way that you should be disjointed.
Does that change any, or do you have to give kind of additional consideration when you're working with external legal? So when your legal department have contracted with a third-party law firm, for example, does that bring any different dynamics to either the flow of information or the relationship versus working with an in-house counsel?
So when the outside counsel is working for the company?
Yes, so the legal department is using outside counsel, maybe because of bandwidth, maybe because they just don't have, they're supporting sell side rather than buy side. And so you're not working with an internal counsel, but it's kind of been pushed to an outside law firm to still help you as a procurement person in those deals.
Yeah, and that does happen probably more than the inside counsel individual would like, but that is the nature of the beast. Anyway, I have always treated it as, if I, the legal individual, have selected an outside counsel to support you instead of me in this role, then I should be made aware in the same way as if it was another attorney on my team.
Mm-hmm.
So there should be no reason that the procurement individual and the outside counsel individual shouldn't speak to each other, but they should make me aware. And I would say a little bit of a more aware than normal, because you have to be cost conscious with how you're talking with outside counsel. So there's a little coaching that the legal team should be doing on how you're preparing information for outside counsel, because it's just so you're not making outside counsel do a lot of the things we've been talking about that we're making our in-house counsel do.
While the clock is running.
While the clock is running.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're paying a salary versus paying hourly. So that's, that's a little different. So that's the way I've coached teams on that. Once I have a comfortability level with them, speaking with outside counsel and using, and doing their best to provide all the answers up front and giving that counsel all the information they need with, in a reasonable manner, then, I watch it less and less, of course, but your legal team should be able to counsel you. But to answer your question, I do believe procurement and the outside counsel can speak without having the legal counsel be an intermediary.
So my last question before we wrap up here is, really, if there's anybody from a procurement perspective, it could be a sourcing buyer, it can be a category manager, is wanting to stay current on legal issues that may be emerging or that are becoming bigger risks to consider, or just want to become more proficient in understanding how to read contracts and be a better partner for legal. Are there places that they could go, or kind of resources, or anything you might recommend that they could check out?
So this is very timely, because I think the best thing that they could do, other than, internet's great, and there are plenty of people on LinkedIn that actually focus on this topic, and there are great resources out there. I think continuing legal education classes that are targeted towards contracting are actually a great resource, whether you're an attorney or not.
Yeah.
So I say it's timely because I went to one earlier this week where it is a contracting class specifically for software license agreements and data processing agreements. I bet the room, just from talking to people in the room and when they were speaking to those that were giving the lessons, I would say 60 to 70% of the room was attorneys.
Yeah.
For attorneys. And I would say a lot of the remaining individuals were either IT security individuals or IT individuals that don't have a procurement team.
Yeah.
Or procurement teams. And I think that's how I learn contracting right now, because I will go to continuing legal education. There's a lot of continuing legal education out there, but if you go to a lesson that is tailored to exactly what you're looking for in a law firm or a organization that you trust, or that has good recommendations, I'm happy to give those to anyone listening that reaches out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to do that, but that's how I would go about it in the most targeted way.
So be super focused. So I guess a follow-up is, how much do things change in terms of, because you think about a contract, and you think, well, contracts have existed in some way, shape, or form since the beginning of time, and here we are. Do you learn how to be a good contract lawyer once, and you've got that learning, and now you're just kind of relying on that learning plus experience, or do things change enough where that continuing education is important? And I think that's the point I'm trying to get at, is that you don't just have a moment in time when you can do this and think I'm good forever. Things do change enough where you still need to be keeping up on different risks that may exist or different ways to mitigate those risks.
Sure. I would say I do them yearly, but that's because I personally have to do that to keep up with my bar.
Yeah.
And this is my job, so I tailor it to that. But I think it also could be done yearly if that was not the case. I would say realistically, though, for those procurement individuals that aren't looking to do this every year or whatnot, for professional services and larger outsourcing type agreements, every 2 to 3 years. For software agreements, I would do the same, but err on the 2 year. Yeah. Every other year is probably fine. Software, you're 1 to 2 years. It really does, especially for the next 5, where of course AI is changing everything.
Yeah. I was about to ask, how does AI? I imagine, aside from using AI to help as part of the solution, which is a whole different discussion. But I'm sure from a risk mitigation and management perspective, the introduction of AI and buying products and services that incorporate AI is a relatively new world that everyone is still trying to figure out the best way of mitigating the risks associated with that.
I think it's actually not as new as the general public would think, because we've had similar concepts since I've been in the business, and we've had machine learning, and we've had, AI-ish items for a long time. So the law's there. It's just not been so prevalent in every single contract. So it's a type of law or a type of contracting that has been more niche, and now it's very much becoming very general. So that's the way I look at it. It's not so much that it's just brand new. Like there are some things that are happening. There's some regulations, especially in the EU, that are coming down about AI. So that will change.
And I'm sure that with the prevalence of AI usage, that there will now be contractual language that is more tested because there are more disputes that occur. And so how the courts, interpret contractual language that was there to protect against these will then determine, how you may write contracts in the future based on the learning from those and how courts interpret these clauses.
For sure. And that's the kind of things that I'm very entertained by. Yeah. And so I enjoy that. I understand that not every procurement person might be entertained by that, or the general public probably thinks that's crazy to be entertained by that. But what will entertain the procurement individuals and their friends in finance is that AI, when you're doing professional services deals or software deals to a lesser extent, it changes the economics on when you're doing professional services deals. When they bring into those discussions, then you're leaving money on the table, because you should be talking about gain share clauses a lot more, where if you're contracting for a guaranteed amount on a professional service agreement and they're doing it 40% less hours than they were in the beginning of the contract, they should be funneling some of that savings back to you. And that's where legal and procurement bridge. And that's the kind of clauses where I would want my procurement individual to be savvy enough to know, like, hey, we're talking about AI. I need to think about gain share. Like, that's kind of the link. That's a good example of a link where it crosses from, like, legal is going to be looking for ownership of the outputs of the AI and making sure your data is not used to go out
training models and things.
And regulated data going out to, like, you can't put PHI into AI where it goes and it trains these models for other people that breaches all sorts of HIPAA laws, like things of that nature. Like, you can't, you got to be able to bridge between when you're seeing that this output ownership issue is coming in place with AI. Both parties should be working together and saying, oh, we should be thinking about this.
Yeah. All right, Paul, I know it's time to start wrapping up, but I want to thank you, first of all, so much for joining us on the podcast. It's been a pleasure to speak to you, and, thanks for sharing your perspectives, experience, expertise with our community today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. This has been a great deal of fun for me.
Well, if anybody is listening and would like to reach out to Paul directly, Paul talked about different courses, for example, and reaching out on LinkedIn. Please feel free to reach out to Paul on LinkedIn, but we'll also put a link to Paul's LinkedIn profile. There's lots of the word link in there in the show notes for today's episode. And that's going to be artofprocurement.com/podcast. That's where we put all of our podcasts, and you'll find today's conversation with Paul in there if you go to artofprocurement.com/podcast. So until next time, Paul, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
If this episode struck a chord with you, please do send it to somebody. We grow here at Art of Procurement through word of mouth, and that would be really appreciated. You can also support us by giving us a thumbs up, a star rating, or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Since 2015, we've built the world's largest free resource for procurement professionals looking to elevate their impact. Our resources span podcasts like this, videos, blog posts, papers, and events. To join us on the inside and to ensure you never miss an episode, a webinar, an event, or a post, please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter, This Week in Procurement. You can do that at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. That's artofprocurement.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.